Okay. Hey, thank you very much for your wonderful review, your laudatory review
Oh yeah, Jesus.
in the Independent Left.
Yeah, well, you know what? It took me ages to write that because just that book is so bloody amazing. But to try and summarize it, I just kept having to read it. I read it again this week, and like it's
It's
just
the best way, isn't it? It's sort of encyclopedic.
yeah, yeah.
You know, I think the argument gets buried sometimes, but I don't mind.
No,
There's
no, no.
just there's so much to remember.
Yeah, I liked you towards the end. You referenced an oral historian who said that the story is never complete or whatever.
Yes, Janet Sandy.
Yeah, I thought that was a great quote. Because you're tying everything together, and you're like, I didn't even mention in the reviews. The part in the prison, which kind of reminded me of the London Hang. So it's kind of like that was the first book of yours I'd read was the London Hang. So all the parts about the prison and the racket playing and the pugilism,
Yeah,
that was incredible.
wasn't it?
Because I remember the many-headed Hydra, and I was reading reviews. Even like left-wingers were kind of going, "Oh, Rediker and Linebaugh are kind of they're romanticizing or whatever." I was like, "It's such total bullshit." But it was because like similar to like E.P. Thompson, but even more so with that book. Like it was like totally where like the working class or plebeian protagonists, like they were like it was their worldview that the book reflected, and the book followed them everywhere, and it was totally unequivocal in its support, which I think was kind of maybe disturbing even for ostensible left-wingers, because it was so like no holds barred or whatever, like the 1741 conspiracy. It was like that book like blew me away. I was like, bloody hell, this is the way. Because I did history in school, and to be honest, I could never really remember liking very much of it. But
yeah,
your books, I just thought, wow, that's like the way history should be written.
Are you a Dubliner yourself?
I'm from
Johnny?
from Clare originally, from the west of Ireland, but I've been living in Dublin longer than I ever lived in Clare.
I lived in Rathmines for a while.
Yeah, I think I remembered you saying that in Counterpunch essay. Yeah, how was that?
Yeah. There was a swimming pool nearby.
Oh, nice.
Which was pretty good because it was quite public in that there wasn't rigid adherence to the different lanes.
Yeah.
So children, slowpokes, old folks, athletes all had to adjust to one another.
Like a commons of the pool.
Yeah, it was crazy. I was longing for some private property. So I wouldn't bump into other people.
Get off my lane or something.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
But I liked it very much.
Was that in the noughties? Was it the early 2000s or?
When was it? Yeah, it was around 2000.
Yeah. Because I remember reading your Counterpunch essay. You were talking about being in Ireland. But anyway, well, the first question I had to ask you was, right, the subtitle to your Red, Wine, Globe, Hot Burning, and it's talking about Tale at the Crossroads. And I think I saw you did a video, and there was a video up on the PM Press blog where you were talking about Crossroads, and you referenced Robert Johnson or whatever.
Yes.
And the idea, kind of the being at the crossroads, and it's obviously the time of Edward Despard and Catherine Despard. There was commons enclosure and fucking race and class, the beginnings of like this horrible thing of white supremacy that we're fucking beset with now, with all these kind of fascist berserkers that are all over the world gaining strength. But like, so their attempt to like overthrow the industrial capitalist system and restore the commons failed. And we ourselves are at the crossroads now between, our plague-ridden current times, the what they call the Anthropocene, or this warming climate. Could you just talk about that a little bit? How the two are related, or if that even makes sense as a question?
Yeah, it does make sense, but what two are related?
How Edward Despard and Catherine's time and their attempt to overthrow the industrial capitalist system, which alas failed, and our time now.
Yeah, so the Anthropocene is basically putting CO2, carbon dioxide, up into the stratosphere So taking what was underneath the earth and putting it on top of the earth is really messed the earth up, to be simple about it. But that Despard, of course, was executed or hanged and decapitated in 1803. And this is at the time when some geologists, based on ice samples from the Antarctica, date the beginning of the pollution of the stratosphere with CO2 that's still up there, of course, that has led to global warming, planetary warming, species destruction, desertification, and so on. So this is a planetary crisis now that we face. And I guess, here in USA, or Turtle Island, as I've taken to calling this part of the planet, based on the first names of the first peoples here. They say Turtle Island. And remember, the USA is basically a product of Despard's time. That is the 1790s, same as the UK, the United Kingdom. This was also the time of the Anthropocene. So you take these two United Kingdom, United States of America, and try to understand how are they related to the factory, and then how is the factory related to the plantation. So these are just taking two, like, quote, modes of production, but they're both, as you were saying, you began your question really with the white supremacy, which is not inherent or not part of, but is a historical phenomenon that also has its origins, or one of its principal origins, in quote, scientific racism, that also has a beginning in the 1790s. So taking the Republic, the Anthropocene, white supremacy, the modes of production, and put them together, and it's a massive attack. It's a massive counter-revolution, I would even say, on the planet and on social life of not only two-footed critters, but horses, livestock, other species. And this is really, mind-blowing in the sense that it contradicts so many standard narratives, of the scientific revolution, of industrial progress, of secular life, of the Enlightenment. All of these, I think, are thrown into question once we begin to see what those, I said four things. Let's see: Anthropocene, the republics, white supremacy, modes of production. I'm sure I'm missing a few other fundamental pillars that had their foundations knit together in the 1790s. And when you say, thank you for remembering Robert Johnson and the Crossroads, because it was that blues tune that was definitely, or the blues man that was definitely in my mind. This Robert Johnson, the blues man from the Mississippi Delta, was said to have made a pact with the devil at the Crossroads, where he was granted genius at the guitar and in music at the price of his soul. And far be it from me to do a sociology of the blues, but it is one of the cultural expressions from Turtle Island that arose out of the plantation and against white supremacy. And so the dominant religion of white supremacy was this dualistic view of the devil versus Yahweh, or, a king of the universe. And Robert Johnson defied it in his music. And I see a direct relationship between that and William Blake, William Blake's Visions of the Daughters of Albion, which is a beautiful meditation against white supremacy, against political domination, against the love of the body, against eros, against the alienation of labor. It's a great poem inspired by the Haitian Revolt of 1791. So the crossroads, I'm trying to write a tale of the crossroads, and I see that in Edward Despard, the Irish, I was going to say country gentleman, but that's totally unfair. He was the last of many children of a Anglo-Irish in County Queens, or County Laois. And Catherine Despard, who was really totally forgotten in history, was an African descendant of Africans, and arose, and they met in the Caribbean or somewhere in North America, maybe Central America. And they formed a revolutionary team, a partnership in the age of revolution, in the age of the Irish, the United Irishmen, in the age of the Haitian Revolt, against which I think the United Kingdom and the USA were both formed. So I see Ireland and Haiti or the Caribbean islands, the Caribbean plantation, as kind of the one side of the barbells, and the other side of the barbells is the UK and the USA. But again, this is perhaps an undialectical image.
I think I remember your extraordinary provocative statement on one of your talks where you said, you're talking about the Commons in the United Kingdom and the United States. You said that they were both kind of formed as a kind of destruction of the Commons, especially in the case of the United States and the United Kingdom, against, let's say, 1798 revolution or attempted revolution of the United Irishmen. So the restoration of Commons would be predicated upon the destruction of what we know of as the United Kingdom and the United States. If I remember correctly, I remember in one of your talks, you said something like that.
Yeah, I think the USA and the UK, they're definitely hanging on, gasping for life, towards the end of they've reached their sell-by date. They're no longer political organizations that can solve the problems that are facing us, beginning with the effects of the Anthropocene, or planetary warming. And their answer, at least, has been to intensify class inequalities and to intensify white supremacy. And they're totally at a loss about what to do against very vibrant forces otherwise, from the assemblies of the Occupy era from 2011 to the attempts at, quote, socialist constitutions in Latin America, against the George Floyd uprising of this last summer.
Yeah,
they're not able to meet these challenges. So, Red Round Globe, Hot Burning. Hey, Johnny, by the way, thank you for saying the whole title, Red Round Globe, Hot Burning.
Oh, yeah. It's a great title. I'm sure it comes from Blake, the Visions of the Daughters of Albion. It's a great title, great poem.
It does.
Great selection of literature in that book. You could like, myself and my pal Kieran O'Rourke were thinking like you could read through your book, and just have like a reading, and people would read from different texts that are assembled in the book. It's because it is like a kind of omnia sunt communia, whatever. It's like this extraordinary coming together of traditions and texts and everything. It's just a fabulous work of art, historical art. Not many history books are works of art. So,
Hey, tell me, how do you pronounce poet O'Rourke's first name?
Kieran,
Huron.
yeah, Kieran O'Rourke, yeah.
Huron. Yeah, thank you for sending me two of his poems, The Commons and John Clare Enclosed.
He's a great poet. Kieran's a great poet. He's political. He's a political poet as well, So he's totally in love with the poetic tradition, like Blake and John Clare, and So he's a great source for me. He sends me poems the whole time. Like he'll go, he's obsessed with a particular poet, so he'll send it on. So it's good to have a friend who's a poet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Edward Thompson kind of had a romantic. He liked the view of poetry as oracular, as related to the prophets, who were able to denounce the powers that be and the world as it is.
It was like Thomas Spence is like you go onto Marxist.org to read his stuff. It's incredible stuff. I mean, you as you're reading it, you feel like started to shout or whatever, because it's so powerful, the stuff he's saying and the way he says it, and the rights of infants or whatever. He's talking about Molochs and all this amazing stuff.
Yeah, I think Thomas Spence is in a different league.
Yeah,
he's in the streets rather than the drawing rooms.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying Blake was not in the streets. He was. He would read aloud in the garden with his wife, and they wouldn't have their clothes on.
Yeah.
Which in good weather sounds
great.
You'd want to have short poems. And he was also seen wandering around the streets of Lambeth with a bonnet rouge with a yeah. So, but Spence definitely, he's not only on the streets, he's lying on the streets to do his chalking. And on the pavement.
Just compelled to like resist and like in these imaginative ways through songs and graffiti and.
And his songs were to the tunes of popular tunes. It reminded me of the Wobblies of the IWW, who would, or of Joe Hill, who would take Salvation Army tunes and turn them into working class fighting songs.
Did your man? Who's the guy who had "They Go Wild," Simply Wild over me? Not Joe Hill, but the other great wobbly songwriter. What the hell is it? He was saying. T-Bone Slim. Was it T-Bone Slim? Didn't he have that one where he's like, "They go wild, simply wild over me," where like he's saying like the cops keep beating me up, the judge keeps putting me away, all because I'm like a class warrior or whatever. I think it was T-Bone Slim.
Yeah, he spoke of civil insanity. T-Bone Slim. He was good. Yeah, so Spence is definitely, these guys. Spence started. I won't say started that tradition. Because I think it goes back to Aesop, and it goes back to Commedia dell'arte in Italy, or popular forms of song, and popular forms of street actions. But definitely, Joe Hill and T-Bone Slim are part of that. And it comes out of Spence. I love it.
Spence, he kind of radicalized Wedderburn, didn't he? Robert Wedderburn. You and Marcus Rediker have a great passage in your Many-Headed Hydra that describes Robert Wedderburn as a linchpin of the revolutionary Atlantic.
Yes.
It's a fucking great expression. It's a great metaphor or whatever. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Right. He's a fascinating character, Robert Wedderburn. Like he was the kind of Jubilee like Spence as well. Big believer in the Jubilee. Like.
That's right. He was.
Get rid of debts, free the slaves, all this kind of like great vision,
And leave the earth fallow for a year.
Yeah.
That's also in Jubilee.
Yeah.
And that definitely pertains to our point in the crossroads.
Yeah.
You know, I was reading Nature magazine yesterday has released this report that um, that 30% of farmland needs to be turned into wild
Oh, right. Yeah,
in order to um, preserve the planet.
yeah, yeah. Allow it to heal, or
Yeah.
yeah.
So that notion of fallow, I think, is essential, and it's in the Jubilee, as you were saying,
Mm.
along with debt forgiveness.
Deadford. Yeah,
That would be a good one.
great. Yeah. Could I ask you about the, you know, that you said that the commons is more forgiving or it's more friendly to women and children, and like when it comes to like the theft of the commons and the rise of like industrial capitalism, like women and children were like prime victims, whether it's in slave labor, like, or the reproduction of slaves, or actually in the factory system where children were literally being fed into machines at the behest of these capitalists. Whereas the commons was like a place of like love and solidarity, but like you know, it was a formidable place with all these different commoning traditions. And like your book, Red Wrong Globe, like you could kind of tread a kind of like an international. You don't. It's not explicitly said in international, but it is kind of like an international of these different commoning traditions. As Despard and Catherine or whatever, their journey is navigated through all these different, from Ireland to like, you know, the Mosquito Indians to the Mayans or whatever, all these different great commoning traditions.
Yeah,
So
it is, but they never do quite get together.
yeah,
That that was the point of his execution, was to demonstrate to the world what happens if you try to get them together.
yeah,
So, but I want to get back to your other point about how the commons is friendlier to women and to children,
yeah.
because that's a thought that's not that I learned from my colleague, our colleague, Jeanette Neeson, who wrote a wonderful book called Commoners,
Mm.
which is, which I think is probably the finest book on the commons in England uh, during this period, during the 18th and early 19th centuries. And it is, she is the one who taught me that, you know, the work of gleaning, the work of pasturage, this is something for children as well as for men and women. In fact, just as I was talking, I was thinking of James Joyce. I think as a kid, he used to go up into the hills. Um, what do they call it? Booling, to uh, look after pasturage of, I suppose, sheep. I don't know if anyone. I'd like to read more about it, but I know he did that. But getting back to the commons and the family life, the family is not just around the kitchen or not just around the living the hearth. It's also outside. It's in the field or in the woods, and here the family will go. I don't, you know, I'm not sure the ramifications of that have been sufficiently explored by historians. You know, what, you know, I made one attempt in here with the chapter on the goose,
Mm.
describe children's, quote, literature. Long before it was literature, it was oral songs and nursery and rhymes, not for the nursery, but for children. And again, it took place outside, where where lessons of cooperation and of sharing would be taught in practice by parents to children. So then, as you say, the factory will put an end and will start to create the divisions between the, quote, public sphere and private sphere, or the women's realm and the public reserved for men.
Yeah.
And that's that. The We're still, of course, suffering the ramifications of that. Um, as men are no longer can no longer rely on domination and as their form of leadership, and women are no longer consigned just to compliance and obedience. These are cultural remnants in our psychologies from this era of the capitalist separation and destruction of the commons.
That's a great way of putting it.
What?
That's a great way of putting it.
Well, we need much more work about it, I think, or I'd like to learn more about it. But Jeanette Neeson, I definitely recommend her.
Yeah. You know, you're thinking about would you say it's like a flaw in Marxism, like the kind of assumption, no one ever talks about how the worker is kind of reproduced. It's kind of like the worker arrives at the factory to do the work or whatever. It's like, you know, do you think Marx overlooked the whole kind of like social reproduction, the stuff that was like considered women's work or whatever within the kind of capitalist system?
Johnny, you're going to make me defensive.
Sorry, no.
Yeah. So I think I've got to acknowledge that because I have such admiration for Marx, and he has so many enemies that to look at his limitations is well, it's necessary, and it's true. He's got a chapter on reproduction, but it's not human. It's social reproduction. And in our era, there have been such great debates, you know, from Maria Mies or Maria Rosa Della Costa or Sylvia Federici or Margaret Benson, who have pointed and worked with this huge absence, the other half of the human race from Marx's political economy. Myself, I think what's missing in so much of Marxism has depended on his political economy, and to the disparagement on the one hand of his philosophical anthropology of the young Marx, but also to the neglect and not even publishing the old Marx. Like, not all the ethnological notebooks have been published or translated, and they are about the commons, whether it's the Russian Obshchina or the peasant Mir or the Iroquois Longhouse here in Turtle Island. And also, Marx spent 2 months at the end of his life in Algeria, and there he was investigating also the practices of the Algerian remnants or forms of commoning. And now all of this is not to say that just because he's interested in commons, he's therefore interested in women's labor. But the definition of Marxism, I think, has to do with unpaid labor. You know, whether it's, and that phrase that I think has really gotten in the way of many people's thinking, which is free wage labor. They use freedom in contrast to slavery. Yeah. I think that's a hindrance to further thought, because women's labor of reproduction, of raising children, of her care work is, whether it's raising children, looking after the old, or getting the breadwinner through the day, that labor is totally unpaid.
It's the most important work. It's like the most important work goes unpaid.
Yeah, exactly.
I know. What David Graeber, the late David Graeber, called the bullshit jobs. we're the bullshit jobs are paid for, but the care work is disparaged.
Yeah. I'm just pausing, thinking of, I guess last Sunday was a worldwide commemoration of David Graeber's life, the 11th of October, but I haven't heard much about it.
I saw something about it on Twitter. It looked lovely. It was women from Rojava talking about the influence of David Graeber.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there was a gathering at Zuccotti Park in New York, near Wall
Mm,
Street.
mm,
Yeah, um, his death unexpected is a great loss
yeah,
to us. Yeah, he described bullshit jobs, definitely. I haven't read Bullshit Jobs. I just got, but I did read Debt,
yeah,
and admire it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What,
Well,
you
we're
know,
speaking about the Jubilee or whatever.
yeah, yeah. But I think Thomas Spence also, confronted this issue of money and wanted to turn money or tokens
Mm,
into political coin
yeah,
that,
incredible class war coins.
yeah, class war coins.
They're all over your book, Red, White, and Globe. There's all it's different coins are in the book.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to
Ah,
find one. I think, yeah, here on page 88. Um, I
yeah,
don't know if you can,
yeah, I've
if,
got it here.
yes. I like that one because I don't say in the book, but I'll tell you now that the bottom one, the top one is a quote from the Irishman Oliver Goldsmith.
Oh, okay.
One only master grasps the whole domain
Yeah,
in 1795, and it shows this village that's just wrecked and these trees that are dead and the squalid nature of the road.
mm,
And then at the bottom is the other side of the coin is called the end of oppression,
yeah,
and it shows two people burning uh, burning property deeds.
yeah. It's brilliant.
So
Yeah,
it's just like when the Zapatista showed up and they led by women, they burnt the property deeds there in San Cristobal.
yeah, yeah. You told a funny story about the Zapatistas where you said that you misunderstood Subcomandante Marcos, something like that. And then you ended up doing a whole Magna Carta. Was that correct? I think I
Yeah,
remember reading that. Thought it was a pretty funny story.
yeah, you've got to use your own ignorance, to advantage. So
Yeah,
I'm lousy at language, as you see. I don't speak Irish or can't pronounce it. Same with Spanish and most other all other languages. So when I saw Subcomandante
yeah,
Marcos referring to Magna Carta, I thought, oh boy, this is the 1215 Charter of Liberty, but it
yeah,
wasn't at all. It was the Mexican Constitution he was referring to. But
yeah,
despite that mistake, it made me pay attention to the Mexican Constitution,
yeah,
which was all against the ejido. It
yeah,
was against, and that had been the beginning in 1994, or the year before. The ejido was removed from the Mexican Constitution. No more commons.
yeah,
That caused me to go think about the English Magna Carta,
yeah,
what had been its relationship to the commons,
yeah,
and as a result, discovering its sister charter, the Charter of the Forest.
yeah.
So yeah, that was a place where I had to turn ignorance to my own.
Oh, you did. You did very well as well, actually, because there's some great stuff about the Magna Carta. Magna Carta Manifesto is brilliant. I saw you at Sherwood Forest. There's a video of you on YouTube at Sherwood Forest talking about
Yeah.
these great oaks. And you're almost like channeling Spence or someone. You get into a real kind of rhetorical power or whatever. It's pretty good.
Oh yeah, it was like a dream, to be in Robin Hood's.
Yeah,
Robin Hood was going to pop out somewhere, and surrounded by all these powerful
yeah,
militants from all over the
yeah.
Midlands of England against fracking and
Wow.
for the preservation of the woodlands.
Yeah,
Yeah, there was some wonderful people there, and and also, Johnny, the most amazing trees I've ever
yeah,
seen.
yeah. That was what
Wow.
you said. You said to be among these great oaks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, they were. It's like I was like out of a Hollywood fantasy movie.
yeah,
I expected these oaks to start, talking or their
yeah,
limbs moving like arms at any moment.
yeah, yeah.
It
Start
was,
moving like. like in Macbeth or something, when the wood starts to move,
Yeah,
or
that's it. That's it.
Dunstan Forest or whatever. With the
Uh-huh.
yeah. Speaking of, actually, one thing, right? Could you just go into a little bit about in a few of your books, like beginning in the London Hanged, you talk about thanatocracy, which I presume means kind of like rule by the spectacle of death or the threat of death or hanging and executions or whatever, as a way of disciplining in these common folk who've been kicked off the commons. And it's in Red Brown Globe Hot Burning as well. You talk about the thanatocracy. Seems like a key concept or whatever for your idea of capitalism, red and blood and claw, red and tooth and claw or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, I'll talk about it, but then I want to know what you think about it because, thanatocracy, I guess it's Greek,
Yeah.
government by death.
Mm.
Like you have democracy, government by the people, or so thanatocracy, it comes from John Locke, or who defined sovereignty as the ability to pass laws with the punishment of death. And so if that was his notion of sovereignty, that's the Roman notion of sovereignty too. When they walk down, when Caesar is displaying himself in the city in a procession, he's preceded by a person carrying a bundle of sticks. And these sticks were the fasces. And they sit, and with an axe among them, they indicated sovereignty. And they indicated the axe was a tool of decapitation. So capital punishment and the ability to murder or to kill another person was the essence both of the processions of Caesar, but also to John Locke and the foundation of the liberal era, the foundation of law was capital punishment.
Hmm.
And of course, I wanted to tie it into Marxism, which is always trying to reduce the value of human beings, the value of work, in order to increase surplus value, which as interest, rent, or profit for bankers, landlords, and capitalists or entrepreneurs provide them with their wealth. But it's always at the expense of those whose value, that is their wages or their receipts of subsistence good, is reduced lower and lower and lower and lower until death arrives. In fact, work itself is deathly, as Marx showed in chapter 10, with the story of Anne Walkley, who died. But as I learned last night from hearing Mike Stout talk about the struggle at the Homestead Steel Works in Pittsburgh, that produced the steel for the world for a couple generations, he said between 15 and 20 people were killed every year at Homestead, at these steel works in Pittsburgh. And then this summer we saw the police knee on the neck of George Floyd. And this again was to demonstrate the power of police. And you look at the policeman's face and you can see that he's sort of taking satisfaction in his work. Mm. Unlike, a lot of executioners, Jack Ketch, a lot of them do not take much satisfaction in that work. And it leads to illness. So there's a spectrum, I think, from John Locke to George Floyd. And we also see it in the management of the coronavirus, of the pandemic, I think, where African-American people, poor people, old people are targeted and in a kind of triage, kind of social unspoken triage, are are left to die, are left to be more susceptible to this disease, and certainly less able to obtain relief. So I've been, and then, going back to the theories of capitalism in the 18th and early 19th century, especially to Malthus, there is a new form of reasoning of calculating the deaths numerically across a whole demographic spectrum, a whole society. And I think that method of reasoning had its origins in Ireland with the English conquest of Ireland, with what's Gregory King and what's his name of the Down Survey, William Petty.
Mm.
People are beginning to calculate and enumerate populations as a whole, and they're beginning to study social reproduction for a whole society. So some of them will also anticipate and try to manage deaths. Who is going to starve and who won't starve? Who is more likely to get a disease and who isn't? And this is also, I think, related to thanatocracy. But mainly, of course, thanatocracy refers to capital punishment, and which I define not just legally, but as the punishment of capital. So it's trying to broaden the meaning. Now, my question to you, Johnny, is if I had some different essays on this, which I've written over the years, and I want to put together in a book, do you think I should call it thanatocracy?
I think it's an extraordinarily suggestive concept. I think it's brilliant. I think it's a really good way. For me, it gives me a good picture in my mind, everything I think about the rise of capitalism and everything through your works, I can get a real vivid picture of just the sheer brutality of the enterprise. And because often as leftists, you're always on the back burner, you're kind of, people say, oh, what about Stalin? What about the brutality of, the Soviet experiment or whatever? You're like,
sure,
absolutely, I'm not denying it. But let's also concentrate on this extraordinarily brutal couple of 100 years, which is just unparalleled in the terms of the amount of savagery. I think the thanatocracy, your works from the London Hanged till Many-Headed Hydra, when Francis Bacon is talking so almost genocidally about working class people and plebeians or whatever. So I think thanatocracy is I find it, and actually it's interesting you just brought up about the current times in COVID. I'd actually had that as a kind of second question that I was going to ask you. Did you think there was any relation to the idea that how people are almost expendable now under this plague system or whatever? Did you think there's some does it in any way relate to what you discussed as thanatocracy?
Yeah, it's already part of a mainstream debate in this election year here in the USA. How many lives did Trump sacrifice? Is it 100,000 or is it tens of thousands? There's sort of a debate, but the assumption in both of them is that those policies led to deaths. But what's missing from that debate, at least in the mainstream, is those deaths were socially targeted to the population that's either dangerous or useless from the standpoint of producing surplus value, from the standpoint of producing wealth or riches for the ruling class. Trump has no use for nursery homes. He has no use for the urban proletariat of cities, and is willing to, I was going to say sacrifice, but it's more than that. He also, well, I don't want to get into its psychology, but but politically, the mortalities, the morbidity of the coronavirus have a target African American, brown people, immigrants, and the elderly. That's common public health knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. So to just slightly turn for a second,
Sure.
I was reading Stop Thief just as I was getting the train there earlier, and I was looking through. You're talking about Karl Marx and Theft of Wood, those early essays that kind of alerted or kind of turned him towards a more class analysis eventually of. But you start talking about criminology. I'm just thinking about in your work, particularly like the London Hanged and like Red Round Globe. It's like you turn the tables on what's called, the criminal and criminology. It's like as if, because you basically say it was the criminalization of customary perquisites. The theft of commons was the theft, and then this whole architecture of law was built in order to defend that, and then call the people who were commoners, who in their work, let's say if you worked in the docks, it was your perquisite or whatever, you took a certain amount of coffee or tobacco, that was criminalized. You had the police there to fulfill it. So now we have this huge architecture of law, this carceral state with a police at the front of it or whatever. So like, I like in your work, did you kind of, you subvert what was traditional criminology to kind of go, actually the real criminals are, it's a bit like, your peasant cone, the law locks up the man or woman that steals the goose from off the common, but lets the greater villain loose that steals the common from the goose. That kind of thing. I think that's a great kind of aspect of your work. It's only one aspect, but it's a very important one, because you're thinking about the whole capitalism, whatever, kind of, it really wrong foots the apologists of capitalism. So I'd like to see them. I just, if you could talk a little bit about that, that seems to be like one of your early kind of entries into like this work of yours, was that kind of thinking about the whole criminalization of things.
Yeah, this goes back for me from, I learned from people, other historians like Edward Thompson or Eric Hobsbawm or George Roudet, who were writing in the early 1960s. Also in the early 1960s in the USA were the municipal uprisings, that began, let's say, in 1962 or 63 in Harlem and Rochester, and then expanded to Detroit, to Watts. And then, and these were rebellions against white supremacy, rebellions against poverty, against slum housing conditions, and against a future with no hope, basically no future at all. And those rebellions led to a huge counter movement of law and order, where it was assumed the only law and order was the law and order of property and of US entrepreneurial individualism. And in California, it was Ed Meese, who becomes the Attorney General for Ronald Reagan, who then, years later becomes president under that cultural sign of law and order, which, a couple of months ago, Trump dragged out and tried to use against the protests of the murder of George Floyd. So anyway, that was the context back in the 60s, this demonization of African-American people. And the man who showed that to me, and it showed it to the world as being a phony, slanderous labeling, was Malcolm X, was Malcolm Little, who himself had been a criminal, a burglar, who did time in prison and who learned in prison, perhaps by wobbly teachers in the late 1940s in the Massachusetts prison. And anyway, over the years, he begins to turn the tables. So all you have to do is see what he does and then do it yourself. and I wasn't the only one. These, like the other historians. So I'm trying to say that my knowledge came out of the movement. What I learned was already being put into practice by the African American working class in the USA, and of course it's worldwide. I mean, wherever you in Ireland would know it, better perhaps, like in South Africa or India, the different forms of humiliation and degradation which the ruling class always uses, whether it has to do with table manners or whether it has to do with racism, whether it has to do with educational opportunities or living conditions. The people from colonial settings learn how to be compliant and how to have that double consciousness, of how to get along with the man, how to get along with authority on the one hand, and on the other hand, save yourself, have some kind of dignity, some kind of solidarity with others who suffer. So taking that quatrain that you quoted, the law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from off the common, but lets the greater villain loose, who steals the common from the goose. There's a story in there that Foucault told us about the carceral society. But also in there is the story of Malcolm X, the story of how the prison can become the university of liberation. I mean, this happened, of course, with H Block in Ireland. It's happened, I guess, I'm not sure where Ho Chi Minh, where was Ho Chi Minh in prison? Was it in was it French prisons in Vietnam?
Yeah,
it may have been.
Yeah,
but so the ruling class will always try to criminalize its opponents. And when it comes to property or to subsistence life, then it gets very desperate. And then famine, early death, morbidity arises. But in this time of Red Round Globe Hot Burning, I guess I got 2 chapters at least about the criminalization of the commons. Usually we think of the commons in rural or agrarian settings or settings of the woodlands or wetlands or pasture. But what these 2 chapters try to help us see is that the so-called criminality in the city is also like a form of opposition to enclosure, forms of opposition that are analogous to the estovers, the pannage, the herbage, the agistment, these old concepts of the agrarian commons. So that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah. Just you were talking about getting radicalized in prison there. I was thinking about, you said that maybe Thomas Spence met Edward Despard in prison. I was thinking, I loved that. I was thinking about that for ages afterwards, just imagining the 2 of them meeting in prison, because Spence was in prison at the same time as the mutineers, or the 1797. There was a naval mutiny, wasn't there? And there was United Irish involved in it.
Yeah, Valentine Joyce.
Yeah, that was like when they were in prison. Was Despard was in prison then as well, wasn't he? Was he locked up?
Yeah, he was locked up in those cells in Clerkenwell, or the Steel.
Yeah.
They called it the Bastille, or the Steel for short.
Is that Coldbath Fields? Is that's Cold?
Yeah, Coldbath Fields. That's it.
Yeah.
But Despard had been in Shrewsbury prison, another new prison.
Yeah.
And his life was a time of prison construction.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think Spence had been there in Shrewsbury prison, or I know he was. But I wrote the Shrewsbury record office because I didn't have the wherewithal to make a personal visit,
Yeah.
because you're always dependent on the generosity of the archivist,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, as a historian. But they couldn't find, we couldn't date an overlap between Spence and Despard in
Okay.
Shrewsbury prison.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a vain search, you know, Johnny.
Yeah.
They would know about each other. Like, I never met Malcolm X, even though he taught me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Certainly there would be plenty of songs that Despard would know. And I think Spence was very expressive, and Despard was not. Despard didn't write much. Spence wrote quite a bit.
Yeah.
That was his method of communication, you know, that and chalking and music. For Despard was a military man. He was a leader of, and could see many different forces at play at once.
Yeah.
That was his, and he saw the city as a target.
Yeah.
You know, as an insurrectionist. He's more like Auguste Blanqui in French revolutionary history.
Yeah. Yeah.
They like here. Okay. Yeah. I don't know Irish politics well enough to know, in the Republican tradition, who are those who are most apt to go for another Easter Sunday, you know, of just attacking, say, the post office as a first step.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Despard was certainly had a tradition of from war. I mean, he had been trained. I mean, he was a skilled artilleryman because of his knowledge of geometry. But he was good at, you know, where do you put a cannon? You know, what do you point it at? How do you get it there? This is largely a question of organizing livestock and human beings to move ordnance around.
Yeah.
That's the big job of labor. And so he, in a way, was a manager.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We have to look at his life, what he was trained at doing. And so then when he's jailed and imprisoned all through the 1790s in one prison after another, Newgate, Shrewsbury, the Tower, the Cold Bastille, and several others, he meets a lot of people, and they want to shut him up.
Yeah. They
want to prevent him from getting food. They want to make sure that there's no glass in his windows. They want to make sure that the door doesn't go down to the floor so that wind and snow and rain can flood his cell. Yeah. You know, they want to work on his malaria and see him perish.
And he had to perform his ablutions in like the piss pot, essentially.
Yeah.
You know, so like, and no spoon or anything.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah. So that's where she is so helpful, and organizing not just her alone, but the relatives, the wives, the women of other political prisoners. They formed support groups. And I think, as you emphasized in a review you wrote, she was intrepid.
Yeah. She put the fear of God in them.
Yeah, she did. Yeah. You know, Horatio Nelson, she'd speak back to him.
Yeah.
You know, Pitt. These people lived in fear of this woman's tongue and of her righteousness. Yeah. Quoting her in Parliament and trying to subvert her by saying a black person could not write good grammar.
Yeah, it was too well written. Yeah.
Whatever. And you know, Johnny, between you and me, you know, I've read her letters, and I would say 98% of the words are spelled correctly.
Yeah.
Let me put it in a positive way.
Yeah.
So, but the English language is a spelling operation.
Like Spence had, didn't he have a whole different, was it orthography or whatever he said? Like it should be spelt, you know, it shouldn't be spelt in this obfuscatory way. It should be spelled clearly. Like forget the Greek and Latin roots or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, another good like Spence attribute or whatever. He was like always thinking.
But also, it reminds me that this ruling class is trying to use our tongue, our language against us.
Of course.
You know, and when they say, "Oh, public schooling," what they mean is you've got to come and learn the way we spell, the way we think, the way we write. Anyway, there she is, helping to write his last speech at the gallows.
Good speech. That speech at the gallows, that's a good speech. I like that one. You know.
Did you?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay.
So she probably must have written the bulk of that. If he doesn't seem to be a man of words, was he? Or
yeah, I mean, I think he learned that you want to put things in threes.
Like liberty, equality, yeah. It's like you have to. That's some like rhetorical thing. You give a word for what some word.
Triads or yeah.
And the interest of the human race. That's a great.
That's not bad, huh?
No.
I mean, that's the key. Yeah. That's the key.
Which I love your rumination at the end of the book. What is the human race? You kind of you end the book in this kind of real bravura. A couple of chapters is like the red-crested bird and the black duck. You know, it's like this, like real kind of interesting kind of mise en scene. Like the speech. The guy who decided he went over. He was sick of like urban life. Went over to live with Native Americans and come back and telling this story and how you connected with the story connects with the Irish and the Native Americans. It's a fascinating chapter, that one. And then what is the human race? A brilliant way to end the book, you know, because it brings all the themes together. I thought it fucking.
Yeah, well, the Irish defeat in 1798, you know, meant a lot. Thomas Jefferson would not have been elected president without the effort of former United Irishmen as editors of newspapers in South Carolina, North Carolina. You know, the splendid historian of Ireland taught me that. Yeah.
Who's that, Kevin Wheeler?
Johnny, hang on for a minute.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'm talking about Kevin Whelan.
Oh yeah.
For a minute, he popped out of my mind.
Yeah, I see him referenced in your books a lot.
Yeah, no, he's you know, this book could not have been written without the very fine Irish scholars and historians and poets, especially from the field day tendency.
Yeah.
But Kevin Whelan is a big part of it, and I was very grateful to him and others who invited me to Ireland at the time of the Good Friday Agreement, and we had a grand meeting on the commemoration, the bicentennial of the 1798 rebellion.
Yeah.
So I really want to thank them, and very much.
Yeah.
And also, do you know Patrick Bresnahan at Maynooth?
No.
Yeah, he's a geographer.
Yeah.
And he wrote this. He wrote an appreciation of Red Round Globe hot burning in the journal Antipode.
Oh, I must check it out.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Yeah. Noam Chomsky wrote a great review of Red Round Globe hot burning. I thought it was great. It was pretty good.
Yeah, he had a little blurb there.
Yeah,
he did. Yeah.
I'm trying to think what.
Johnny, I want to get back. We let a point slide by that I want to return to, which was Catherine Despard was active in preventing the foundation of a panopticon.
Oh yeah. Total Field Commons or
yeah. Well, I just wanted to emphasize that.
Yeah.
That was one of Jeremy Bentham's favorite projects.
And you have there's a great expression in the book at the beginning of, you say that she helped defeat it, so it just become a part of the totalitarian imaginary.
Imaginary.
Yeah, I thought that's a great little expression there. Right, there's
Yeah.
a totalitarian imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of syllables in that one.
Yeah, I had to think about it as I was saying it, so I didn't miss one of them.
I'm not sure Thomas Spence would like that one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's been I'm conscious of time. I don't want to keep you too long, but it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you.
Yeah. Well, if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to give it a shot.
Well, oh yeah, I did have one actually, which was kind of, it's about the diggers and Winstanley, and the earth is the common treasury for all. And if I understand your book correctly, it's like, so obviously Winstanley and the diggers, true levelers, the ranters or whatever, they come from an earlier tradition as well, like probably Wat Tyler but the message from like the English Revolution, like the radical message, the true levelers and the diggers and the ranters, that stays alive. So like when Edward Despard, when he's like the prosecutor, Lord Ellenborough, he's like going, you're like a leveler or whatever, you believe in this equality, like this terrible stuff. So it's like, this is like the Winstanley's message is back again. It's come back through Edward Despard and his conspiracies. Essentially, it's gone around the Atlantic and it's come back as this conspiracy to restore the commons.
Despard is only one of the vectors.
Yeah,
there are many others.
But it's fascinating that like you said in the book, that stories help keep alive the memory of defeats, or help us understand defeats. And I think your book kind of does that. As like, if you took your book as a story, it kind of pieces together all these things and like all the different things happening at the time and helps us make sense of defeats. But like, defeats aren't the end of, we can still, in the 21st century, we can still restore the commons.
Yeah, I think the crossroads isn't something that just happened back then.
Yeah,
it's still here, and the alternatives are for us to revive.
And was your man Lord Ellenborough, he also criminalized abortion as well as like prosecution.
Oh, what a pig. What a total pig.
The women of Ireland repealed the Eighth Amendment, which essentially criminalized abortion back in the day, but they repealed it in 2018. So it's
very good.
It was one great victory, for a lot of the people who were opposing the women's right to choose, women's right to control their bodies, were a bit like your man Lord Ellenborough. You talk about the term ectrophy or whatever, the kind of breed, like your body is there to breed or whatever. You're a controlled vessel for like greater interests, be it capitalists or family or whatever. So this was one major victory against that kind of thinking,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's emboldened a whole fucking far right rabble of Catholics and lunatics in the country at the minute, So there.
Yeah, we have that now on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. But, well, I'll say thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me.
Johnny, I'll say it's been a pleasure. Yeah. The figure I'm interested in this book, so far I haven't, is this guy James Wilson.
Yeah.
Because he
declares a human being could be 3/5 of what?
Yeah, he's the 3/5 man.
Yeah,
but he's also the explicit anti-commoner.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've got to put him up in the USA mainstream in some way.
Yeah,
they don't boast about him because he died in prison as or being chased by creditors. He was such a debtor.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, even though he was on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, ignominious fall.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully the rest of them will enjoy a like ignominious fall.
Yeah. Okay.
Peter Linebaugh, thanks a million for talking. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Johnny Patrick Flynn, the same.
Yeah.
Back to you. And thanks to the women of Ireland.
Gently, yeah. Good way to end. Cheers. Thanks, Peter.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.